people sort of, I think, forget that this is not a technological movement. This isn't an iPhone. If you're wrong about Bitcoin, you're not going to lose $1,000 on a phone. You're going to lose everything. So as a matter of course, like the weight and the gravity of that decision is far greater. So the whole world isn't just going to fucking magically move onto Bitcoin in the same way as they magically move from, the Ericsson flip phone to the iPhone. It just doesn't work that way. Bitcoin is a techno-socioeconomic phenomenon. It touches all three things. So it's going to take generations for it to occur. With that in mind, like the interregnum is going to last decades. It's going to last generations. And the interregnum is over when fiat finally dies. So when we're in the pure Bitcoin standard. So during that interregnum, we're going to have two standards, fiat standard and Bitcoin standard. One is a declining standard. The other is an emergent standard. So the interregnum is going to be messy. We as the quote unquote founding fathers of this new paradigm, we kind of get the benefit of being the founding fathers, but we also drew the short straw when it comes to dealing with the interregnum because it's going to be fucking chaos.
Hello, friends. Thank you for coming back for another episode of the podcast. Today we have Aleks Svetski, an author and content creator who I have gotten so much interesting information from over the years. He's written so many different articles and books and jumped on all sorts of podcasts. You've been starting businesses all over the place. I think you are the definition of just doing a million things at once. And I appreciate all the content you put out there and the ways that you have changed my thought processes over the years when it comes to Bitcoin and philosophy around it and different political systems and just figuring out what we're going to do in the future and how we can best create an optimistic future for humanity. I think that's a really big idea, and you do a lot of work on that. So, Aleks, thank you so much for joining me today, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate the intro, man. I appreciate all the assistance you've also given me along the way. You're one of my first readers of Bushido. Gave me some great comments there. And yeah, man, I hope to slowly change the doing a million things and really focus in. And a big commitment for me in 2025 is that a bunch of the smaller things I'm actually offloading. So, for example, the Bitcoin Times, I'm getting into a partnership with Knut and Luke from Freedom Footprint Show. So they're going to kind of take that over and lead it. And ideally, my life kind of boils down to Satlantis in a professional capacity and Bushido in a personal sort of like writing capacity, and that's really going to be the two things. And hopefully, I can keep it to two, and that's it.
We'll see how that goes. Famous last words. Yeah, that's great. And we'll definitely talk about those two things. And as we sort of discussed before recording, there are so many different pieces that you've had over the years that really changed the way that I thought about a lot of things. So I want to sort of just go through each of those main ones that really stood out to me and just go over the main idea to give my listeners sort of a catch up on that. And we'll finish things off with the future, the Bushido Bitcoin and Satlantis, which are two really exciting things that you've got working on now.
Thank you.
So I would like to go all the way back. I know that this is something Bitcoiners are so tired of talking about, but you had an article, Why Bitcoin Not Shitcoin? That's where I want to start.
Classic.
And so many of us Bitcoiners are just so over this now, just talking about why Bitcoin is better than all the altcoins. But I think you have a really good framework for understanding that and experience that also just changed the way that you thought about why, for those out there listening who maybe are still new to this whole like crypto space and they're thinking, is Bitcoin just another cryptocurrency? Why is Bitcoin different and why Bitcoin not shitcoin, Aleks?
Yeah, that's like a perennial question. And it's funny that article, I still remember writing that. I was I believe I was in Austin at the time, or maybe when the article went live, I was in Austin, something like that. And it was where I ended up on Sailor's radar, actually. So that was my little Sailor moment. He retweeted it and followed me, and I was like, okay, sweet. I did something right with this one. And I tried to break it down. So, I mean, this has been a number of years now, so like I'm going to be stretching my memory here. But basically, I remember breaking it down like technically, economically, and I guess philosophically or morally speaking. And they were sort of like the three buckets. And I think in the technical element, I just spoke about how like you've got Bitcoin, blockchain, and crypto, right? And sort of blockchain is like a single ingredient of the broader recipe that Bitcoin is, and like sort of taken on its own. It's kind of like, battering some eggs and saying this is a cake. It's like, well, no, it's not, because the cake requires all the other ingredients. So it's like absolutely fucking ridiculous on its own. And with crypto stuff, like the big technical difference is not so much, I guess. I guess it depends what kind of shitcoin you're talking about. Like, but Ethereum has some sort of technical similarities to Bitcoin, but the big difference is the genesis around the how Bitcoin was formed, and what crypto sort of represents, and the whole point of Bitcoin, technically speaking, is that it delivers settlement guarantees and a extremely high cost of reversing any sort of transaction, and it does so by achieving autonomous consensus. Now, other crypto blockchains and all that sort of stuff do something similar, but the cost is far, 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 far lower, which means they are not censorship resistance. Like, I think Parker Lewis talks about this as like censorship resistance is a binary thing, right? It's either it is or it's not. There's no sort of in between. And this is where sort of people just really have a lack of understanding, generally speaking, of like Bitcoin does that job, and that job is extremely expensive, technically speaking. Like, Bitcoin is fucking so energy intensive. It is so technically convoluted and technically, robust. It's like I think Safedin came up with this analogy first. It's like going through a drive-through with a tank, or a jet airliner. It's like, it's not the right thing for that. And the only place you need that level of technical censorship resistance is on something that is a real honeypot, which what bigger honeypot is there than the money everyone uses, right? So there's the technical element, the philosophical element, sort of ties into a bit of that the genesis story of like the whole point of Bitcoin is rules, not rulers, whereas crypto, in philosophically speaking, is far more like fiat. And I think I was one of the early people to do this, was to really talk about Bitcoin in one category and crypto and fiat in another category. And I know there's a lot of memes about it these days where they sort of say, the one where it's like people think it's this, and they sort of have Bitcoin inside crypto, where it's really this, where Bitcoin is outside, crypto and fiat are together. And that is really fundamentally the truth, because I think when you look at what Bitcoin is doing and what it's fighting, it fundamentally stands against the idea of a money issuer. And what's happened in the crypto space is people have realized they can issue their own money. So, of course, like that's the holy grail. Like, if you don't have to work to produce anything, you just like press a button and print some money. It's a fucking no-brainer that you're going to go and do that, right? And that's what essentially all of the crypto projects are. They're a license to print money. More often than not, that money is like not worth anything. But in some cases, that money is worth something. There's like crypto networks that are worth billions of dollars based on the promise of a founding team who issues themselves all the money in the first place. So, like, tell me how that is different to the Federal Reserve. In fact, the Federal Reserve actually has some checks and balances in place, whereas the crypto things don't. So I would argue that the crypto is more fiat than any kind of fiat can be. Like, they're worse than Zimbabwe. So that's kind of like a second. And then what was the other one? Economically speaking. Yeah, so like fundamentally Bitcoin is about a fixed supply of money that is programmatically issued over a predetermined period of time. And economically speaking, crypto is the opposite of that. It is whatever amount of money should be issued by whoever decides whenever the fuck they want for no specific period of time. Like, economically, they're two different things. And Bitcoin, I don't know what the listeners of this podcast are going to be like, but if they subscribe to any sort of Austrian thinking, Bitcoin is fundamentally the most Austrian. And I don't even like using the word Austrian economics. It's like sound economics. All other economics is a scam, right? Like, all other economic schools of thought are stupidities, because the point of economics is to try and predict the future. And Austrian economics is the only form of economics or the only study of economics that is rooted in reality, because it starts from first principles that are measurable, that are praxeologically accurate. It's literally praxeology, the study of human action. You start with that, and then you go out from there. Whereas all other schools of economic thought are literally just imaginary fairy tales. Like they're fantasies that people tell each other, and they're like, okay, well, you know what? We're just gonna do this, and why not? And it's no wonder they can't tell the fucking future properly. They can't accurately forecast because they're not doing economics. They're playing games. Um, and Bitcoin aligns with true economics, with Austrian economics, that school of thought, and it is very paradigmatically different, I think, to both crypto and to fiat and to that existing paradigm. It's like a dose of reality in amongst all of the fantasy. So they're kind of the three pillars. That's what I remember off the top of my head. I'm sure there's lots more in the article. If anything you want to dig into, we can go.
I'll definitely put all these in the show notes. I recommend people just go read them because they are the same sort of content I try to put out, just timeless. All the ones I saved here, they're not based on current events. They're more looking way deep into the future. They'll be relevant for a very long time. I think that hopefully crypto is around for a long time, but we'll see. Who knows when that's going to actually crumble, because there's a lot of stupidity out there, as you are aware.
Yeah, there's a lot of stupidity and there's a lot of like opportunity to make easy money, and that's why like I used to think that crypto was around the corner to crumble, but I've come to believe that it's going to be a long time. The interregnum is going to last a long time, maybe decades. Sorry, not maybe decades, definitely decades, maybe even a century. So I think we've got a long time to deal with shitcoiners, unfortunately.
What is this interregnum? Because I've seen that come up a few times. I know there's some good graphics out there of the fiat interregnum. It's basically a fancy way of saying the middle ground, right?
Yeah,
Where does
interregnum
that
means,
fit into this picture?
yeah, the word means basically time between kings, right? So like when there was a passing of one king, the period until the other king was the intervening period. So for us, we're already in the interregnum because there was a time before Bitcoin, right, which was pure fiat, and that was the fiat era. Then there's a time after Bitcoin where Bitcoin is sort of emerging, and we're still right in the early innings of that. I wrote an article about a year and a bit ago, which was called the Three Generations Theory, where I kind of like try to push people to think a little bit longer with respect to how like Bitcoin's going to mature and evolve. People sort of, I think, forget that this is not a technological movement. This isn't an iPhone. If you're wrong about Bitcoin, you're not going to lose $1,000 on a phone. You're going to lose everything. So as a matter of course, like the weight and the gravity of that decision is far greater. So the whole world isn't just going to fucking magically move on to Bitcoin in the same way as they magically move from, the Ericsson flip phone to the iPhone. It just doesn't work that way. Bitcoin is a techno socioeconomic phenomenon. It touches all three things. So it's going to take generations for it to occur. So with that in mind, like the interregnum is going to last decades. It's going to last generations. And the interregnum is over when fiat finally dies. So when we're in the pure Bitcoin standard. So during that interregnum, we're going to have two standards, fiat standard and Bitcoin standard. One is a declining standard. The other is an emergent standard. And during that period, because one is declining, because the other is emergent, there's going to be a lot of positive opportunity and negative opportunity. Positive opportunity in the sense that there will be a wealth transfer. There'll be intelligent people who find it. They'll transform their lives. They'll do all sorts of things. They'll build wealth. They'll start to amass true capital. Negative opportunities, there's going to be millions of fucking scams. And whether that is scamming on a mass level through like issuing your own shitcoin and printing money, or whether it's like small scale scams, it's people getting into Bitcoin that don't understand what it is, like getting either hacked or ripped off or lied to or cheated, or all the things that are going to come with that. So the interregnum is going to be messy. We as the quote unquote founding fathers of this new paradigm, we kind of get the benefit of being the founding fathers, but we also drew the short straw when it comes to dealing with the interregnum because it's going to be fucking chaos. And I think I just find that Bitcoiners fundamentally forget that. And I don't say it as a black pill. I say it more as a reality pill. It ain't all sunshine and rainbows out there. Like there's going to be a lot of mess. Don't think that Bitcoin's going to come and fucking all of a sudden magically save everyone and change the world. That doesn't work like that. Culture and economics and society, civilization, all these things are way more multifaceted than just number go up and it's going to fix everything. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah, and one of the points you brought up in your past podcast, which I think is an important perspective to have, is this idea that Bitcoiners very likely will be framed and blamed for that chaos. So, how do you
100%.
see that going down? Like, what do you think is your vision of as this fiat interregnum goes down in flames, kicking and screaming? The powers that be have the infinite money printer still, as we speak right now, and they're going to use it to blame everything with themselves. They're very ego driven, and how is this going to happen? Do you think? Like, what do you see happening to the Bitcoin community in the global zeitgeist?
Yeah, this one is very tricky because as much as the parasites who print the money are dangerous and they'll ferment a particular type of narrative, what's more dangerous is the teeth or the claws of that entity, right? And the teeth and the claws of that entity is all the fucking idiots, right? And what I mean by that is all the people who are wearing masks and telling you to get vaccinated and all that sort of stuff. They're going to come straight out the fucking woodwork again, and they're going to do the bidding of the globalists. So I personally believe that the biggest danger to civilization over the interregnum period is going to be democracy, is giving those muppets a vote, giving them a say, giving them the power to do stuff, because they're going to be the ones who are envious and resentful enough to blame you and I for all of their problems. So there is fundamentally three different categories of people here. There is like civilization is going to bifurcate for sure. And I've sort of said this jokingly in the past, but there'll be Homo Bitcoinicus and Homo Hystericus, right? And like Homo Bitcoinicus are the people who are touching grass, eating meat, like holding Bitcoin, building local communities, and all that sort of stuff. And we are not only like psychologically going to become different, we're going to be biologically different. This is a speciation event. People think that is like eugenics. Well, I'm here to tell you it is fucking eugenics, right? It is like literally we are going to evolve differently to the people that are going to, put bug juice in their veins, who are going to be fucking inside under fluorescent light and dependent on CBDCs. We will fundamentally evolve different. The thing is, the Muppets, the Homo hystericus, is very easily weaponized. And because there's more of them, it's going to be a dangerous situation. This is why democracy fundamentally doesn't work. It's never fucking worked. There's a big section in the book that I recently wrote where I do a deep dive on Rhodesia, and I talk about how like people like. Let me actually ask you: do you know where Rhodesia is?
I don't. I haven't heard of that.
Okay, so this is one of the things that drives me crazy about the Bitcoin space. People walk around with the $1 trillion Zimbabwe note, and they'll say, "See, this happened because the Zimbabweans printed money." It's actually fucking not the case. What happened was Rhodesia was the country before Zimbabwe, and Rhodesia was a landed democracy, meaning that the only people who had a vote were those with a threshold of property. And it was it was the breadbasket of the entire African continent. It was a landlocked country with a small population, but they were rich. They were strong. They were noble. They called it more British than Britain. And what happened was the fucking Western powers, America and UK, who were pushing in the 60s the whole movement around democracy and everyone gets a vote, universal suffrage, and all this sort of shit. They turned their backs on Rhodesia because Rhodesia was originally a Commonwealth nation. They were part of the West, and they embargoed their own fucking ally because Rhodesia stood as an example of a form of democracy that wasn't one man, one vote. And they were the most functional country in Africa at the time. In the history of Africa, I should say. And the commies came in, so the Red Army of China and the USSR, and the Rhodesians held them off, two of the biggest powers at the time, with a small scout army. And then the UK and the US embargoed Rhodesia, stopped supplies coming in and out, stopped money coming in and out, stopped aid coming in and out, stopped munitions, gun and everything. And they basically fucked them over. And that's how Mugabe got in power. And that's how Rhodesia changed from Rhodesia to Zimbabwe. And that's when the money printing started happening. So the money printing comes late stage. It does not come before. You don't just fucking wake up one morning with a strong civilization and say, oh, let's just print $1 trillion. It doesn't work that way. Like, and this is where Bitcoin is. I've actually come to believe that the root of all the problems is not the money printer. It's actually democracy. It's what comes upstream. The money printer is a later stage symptom. So if I use an analogy of people getting cancer, like getting the cancer, like the money printer is the cancer. But the problem was upstream when you started eating seed oils and putting crap on your skin and doing all that sort of stuff. That's where democracy lives. Now, granted, they can go hand in hand, but this is, I don't know how I got on this tangent, but how the fuck did I get on this tangent? Anyway, whatever. Like there's an important thing here for people to understand, and I think understanding this history and using that as a way to figure out what the future will look like. I think that's what I was getting at. Is there'll be parasites and there'll be the Bitcoiners, and the Bitcoiners are kind of like the propertied leadership of what Rhodesia was at the time. So it's incumbent on us to learn about that history so that we understand, because we are going to be the minority. And it'll be like the parasites will be the ones that are trying to cut our legs off, cut our resources off. Luckily, with Bitcoin, we have an economic outlet and the ability to get around that. But it's not enough. Just because we can send sats to each other and fucking wank off on, Nostr and zap each other doesn't mean we're going to solve all the problems. We've got 100 other things to figure out, which have not been figured out. So, yeah, it's gonna be a tricky interregnum. That's all I can say.
One of the examples I want to throw in here that is such a beautiful illustration of what you're talking about, where I am completely with you. There will be a splitting of humanity. There's going to be a wedge from the Bitcoiners, the naysayers, the skeptics, the people who do their own research and eat lots of meat, get lots of sun, and disrespect the fiat paradigm. And there's going to be the fiat sheep who just continue following what the TV says and just consumes the government propaganda. And a somewhat similar example of this is happening in Mexico, where I'm at right now. I just talked to Dr. Fernando Morales recently. I'm not sure if you know him, but he's a doctor here in Mexico. He's a really dialed in Bitcoiner. He's on Nostr as well. And we talked about how even northern Mexico and southern Mexico are completely different.
Mm-hmm.
And northern Mexico there's lots of farming, there's tons of beef everywhere, like people eat lots of meat. And here in southern Mexico, where I'm actually living right now, it's people just eat corn and tortillas and beans and pretty much like very little meat. It's hard to find it. I pretty much clean out the store every time I go shopping because there's just so little there.
And they look different, right?
They look very different. And this was one of the things that I brought up with him, like, wow, I can see. And I should say I haven't been to explored northern Mexico much, but I've known a bunch of people that have been there and have definitely learned that there is a very big biological difference. People here in the southern part are tiny and all inflamed and overweight. It's just unhealthy. I'm towering over everybody here. Where even when I was just in like Mexico City, for example, I'm like taller than most people at 6'1", but not gigantic. But here, everyone is like truly tiny. And we were talking about that. We have this idea in the West that, if you ask an American person, what is the stereotypical like Mexican person look like? What's their body type? We think, oh, they're short and chubby. And I think that's largely because of the diet.
Mm-hmm.
And as you understand, and we talk about a lot here as well, the money comes even further than the diet. If you're trying to go back steps, like what caused this, fiat money is a huge part of that. And so Bitcoin plays a huge part in people's health. People don't really understand that.
Yep. No comment there other than agree.
Yeah. So I would like to bring in here you're talking a lot about democracy here, and that is one of the things that you have really shifted my brain on. You and Safety and kind of tag teamed my noodle on that one, just thinking about it very differently than I used to, because I think most people growing up consuming the standard corporate media just believe that democracy is a good thing and this is what we should strive for, and this is the bad color team in politics is like trying to take away your democracy. Like it's used as this thing that we must protect and save and keep. And you had an article, another one on my list here, Bitcoin is not democratic. And I would love to discuss that one a little bit, because that just the part one of that series was really the one that was like, whoa, okay, maybe I've thought wrongly about all this democracy stuff. So could you give us a bit of a summary there?
Yeah, that was one of my favorite series. I think, did I end up doing 5 parts? I don't remember now. I think something like that.
I think it was 4. I can't completely
Yeah,
remember either.
4
Something
or
like
5.
that.
Yeah. Man, I should totally turn that into a book one day. Um, so I think recently I've been talking about Bitcoin as a framework for excellence. And I don't believe Bitcoin is about helping poor people, helping, bank the unbanked and all that kind of stuff. I honestly couldn't care less about that. I think what Bitcoin is for is helping the best. And what that means is, in a functional society, you're going to get Pareto laws of all kinds. And that's just a fact of life. It's a fact of the universe. It's a fact of society, fact of civilization,
What's
fact
that,
of
Pareto laws? What is
yeah,
that exactly?
Pareto law, 80-20 law, basically. So you
Okay,
get a you
like
get an
the
80,
bell curve, basically.
well, not so much even the bell curve. You just get a I mean that is an example because you got 80% in the midwit and then your fringes, but I'm talking less about the bell curve, more about a power law distribution. So you get an 80-20 distribution, and within each 80-20 there is another 80-20, and that's sort of like it's a fractal all the way down, right? Um, I mean, people listening to this may have heard like 20% of the things you work on deliver 80% of the benefit, right? 20% of your customers bring you 80% of the money, et cetera, et cetera. So that rule always exists, and that's just how nature functions. You look at like whether it's sexual selection, down to like how flowers function, down to what you see in the night sky, like all of this stuff operates on some type of Pareto distribution, right? Like 80-20 is part of the fucking universe. So when you have something like Bitcoin, which I kind of think of it, there's a quote in the book where I say, if the definition of reality is that which has no rewind button, then Bitcoin is the realest money we've ever had, right? So Bitcoin is good because it's as close to reality as possible. If I go jump off a cliff tomorrow, I'm fucking dead. I can't just like rewind it and try again, right? Or you can't die on my behalf, right? So with Bitcoin, if I send it somewhere and I didn't double check the address or I sent it to the wrong place or whatever, there's no hotline to call. It's like, hey, Satoshi, can I have my money back? That doesn't fucking work like that. So the no rewind button, number one, it's a forcing function for responsibility and for maturity, but it's what predicates reality, right? Like reality, there's no rewind button. So if Bitcoin is real money and reality is 80-20, we're going to get an 80-20 distribution in civilization. There's going to be 20% of people that are better off and that produce more and that create more than the other 80%. That is not democratic. Like democracy by its very fucking nature is non 80-20. It is in fact it's a fucking inversion of the 80-20 law. It's an inversion of natural order. It's an inversion of the thing that actually works in all of civilization, all of humanity. And for me, when I think about like the impact that Bitcoin is going to have on civilization, and this is why I call it a framework for excellence, is it will incentivize the 20% who are more productive, more talented, more driven, more energetic, more outgoing, more gregarious, whatever the element is, more masterful. It will encourage them to do more because it will incentivize them, and it'll disincentivize the monkeys, the lazies, the stupids, the jealous, the envious, the resentful, and all of that sort of stuff. And what it's going to do is it's going to probably create an environment in which the best rise to the top. This is like the definition of excellence, etymologically speaking, is to separate oneself from the others. Like I don't know if you remember from when you were doing the reading, like remember the etymology of excellence is exceller, is like to climb the mountain, to separate yourself from the plane. That's what Bitcoin will do. It's not going to help all the fucking poor people. Like poverty is the natural state of humanity, and poverty is what happens when you do not have excellence. So democracy leads to poverty because it is anti-excellence ideology. It is anti-excellence. It is an anti-excellence structure for society. This is why in the last 100 years, particularly as America has become more and more democratic, it's getting more and more and more poor. Like the standard of living is going down, the psychology is going down, all this sort of stuff is dropping. That's in the face of all of this technological process, right? Progress. So like the technology is kind of like buoying the standards a little bit, because the pace of technological progress is so like fast, but everything else is degrading. So it's kind of like one force is upwards and every other force is downwards. And the results are that people are dumber, fatter, stupider, lazier, more lonely, more depressed, more divorced, more dependent on SSRIs, and all the other stuff is really bad. So anyway, I'm kind of going off on tangents here, but Bitcoin is fundamentally not democratic. It doesn't work in a democratic manner, and the result of a society going onto a Bitcoin standard is far from democratic. It is much more Pareto organic, and that is more excellence oriented, which is the opposite of democracy.
And I think that a question that may come from that is, well, don't the best of the best rise up to the top right now? Like, how does that change anything? But I think that us Bitcoiners know, when we look at how fiat works, that's not how it's working.
Yeah,
The people who are at the very top right now did not
yeah.
get there through being excellent by any means. The politicians, for example.
Yeah. The thing is, like, it's very hard to defeat nature, right? So as much as you go all fiat retard, you can't eliminate all of the best people, right? So you kind of still get some of the best people still rise, but the thing is, you get way more parasites like rising up, and then some of the really good people who might otherwise not be tempted to get into the parasitic games, they're like, fuck, to compete with these other scumbags, I have to do that. So they kind of like inch by inch move that way, and each inch sends the entire world into that direction. So like if we cut that off, the incentive for the best goes the other way. It's like, okay, I need to compete in that direction to get better, to compete against myself and the other best and everything like that. And it just kind of like we suffocate the parasites, and that's the most important thing here. Is like we've got to suffocate the parasites at all costs, because if we don't, they're going to proliferate, and as they proliferate, they turn everybody else into a parasite. And the thing about the lemmings, or the thing about the masses, is that they are prone to emulate whatever leadership represents. So if leadership is parasitic, the rest of the world very quickly becomes parasitic. Because leadership is inspired, strong, powerful, beautiful, all that sort of stuff. The rest of society tries to emulate that. And that's super, super important to remember.
Yeah, and another one of the pieces you have is Bitcoin is responsibility go up technology. I think that's a word we haven't really injected in here yet, but that's very relevant to this, because in order, like you mentioned, when you screw up with your Bitcoin transaction, you lose your Bitcoin. It forces responsibility on you. There's no customer support. And this is like an obstacle for a lot of people that are used to this banking system in these places where, there's endless do-overs, and the more money you have, the more like ways you have to do things over, ill-gotten money a lot of the time. So how does Bitcoin incentivize responsibility in a way that creates these positive trends toward a better future?
Well, I mean, it ties back to what we just discussed earlier about like the reality of Bitcoin, and when let's use a mental visual here. So you're on a cliff, and you look over, and you fall, and you die. You're responsible for your own action, right? But if you look over a cliff, and just as you fall, someone catches you, you were not responsible. Somebody else was in some way responsible for you. And what happens is you might look over the cliff again. So you haven't learned your lesson. So you don't take responsibility for the thing. So you do it again. And then at some point when that person's not there to be responsible for you, you end up falling off the cliff, and you wonder why. So we sort of take that out by, scale that up to billions of people. Like we've outsourced our responsibility for everything, for our responsibility for education, for food, for money, for politics, for thinking, for basically everything. Like, the experts, the politics, the banks, this, that, the doctors. Nothing's our responsibility anymore. And I kind of think in that article I spoke about like the game of responsibility hot potato that everyone's playing. It's like as soon as responsibility comes near, it's like, oh no, it's not my fault. It's not my problem. It's somebody else's. The whole we're all in this together in 2021, where it's like you're not responsible for yourself, but you're somehow responsible for the whole world. Like this inversion of like completely impractical, fucking stupid version of responsibility, which is non-existent, and the renunciation of personal responsibility. So it's like, no, you don't have any bodily autonomy. You can't decide for yourself because you're too stupid. You have to decide for everybody. This kind of stuff like has a real detrimental effect because people become infants. Like the definition, in my opinion, of an adult is when you are maximally responsible. When nobody like that's when you know you're an adult. Like when the decision, when the buck stops with you, like when you have to make the decision. And that's actually why I think we've got so many, like I saw a word the other day floating around on Twitter, kidults, right? Like we've got these adults that are still fucking kids, right? Like they don't actually know how to carry the burden or the weight of responsibility. So they think, their parents are going to look after them, the government's going to look after them, the banks are going to look after them, some other external authority in some way, shape, or form is going to tell them to do whatever. And look, granted, maybe that's not unique to our times. Maybe that's always been the case with like the peasant and the lemming class. I could be wrong. Maybe there's an argument to be made that the peasant and lemming classes of the past had to take on more responsibility because they were so much closer to death than we are. I think maybe we've created so many creature comforts that the lemming class can survive and just be entirely dependent without actually having to face the pain of death or starvation or anything like that. So I'm not sure exactly. I mean, I don't think we'll ever know because we can't go back in time, but we'll see. So to tie it back to responsibility, it's when you have to think twice about what you do, you are behaving more responsibly. And I think Bitcoin forces you to do that in an economic capacity. Like, I don't know if anyone listening to this has ever had the experience of losing Bitcoin. Like, I've lost a stupid amount of Bitcoin, particularly in the early days. Like, just not understanding, sending to the wrong addresses, man. I've like lost it in mixes and this and that and like all sorts of stuff, like Bitcoin amounts that make you want to vomit. And I learned the hard way because there was nobody to sort of help me or solve it for me and everything. Like even to this day, like you pull out a hardware wallet that you haven't used for a little while and you're fucking sweating. You're like, I got, like, am I going to do the right thing here? Am I going to like send it in the wrong place and everything? It's like, so like you take on this responsibility because nobody can help you. And I think in some ways, Bitcoin's a catalyst for you to start thinking about that and behaving like that in other dimensions of your life, which I think is extremely healthy. Now, it can get unhealthy. Like you can go all the way to the other side of the spectrum, which is become a fucking prepper. And you're like, okay, I've got to build my own house. I've got to build my own car. I've got to grow my own food. I've got to do fucking everything. It's like, well, relax, dude. Like society doesn't actually work like that. There is, there's a give and take of these things. You just have to choose which part of the spectrum you want to be on. Like you don't want to be a entirely dependent fool, but you also, I don't think, can be entirely independent, unless you chuck a Kaczynski, right, and go out into the fucking bush and live by yourself in a cabin. Like so there's like there is a middle ground somewhere, but the more mature the society, I think the more on the side of the responsibility end of the spectrum people are, and I think that's a healthy thing.
Yeah, and one of the pieces there that I find interesting is how you talk about the peasants and the lemming classes are like when we're thinking what were these classes like compared to the modern peasants, the fiat peasants. One of the aspects that you bring up is that they were closer to death, and so that made things different for them. And that also sort of brings up this idea of these warrior classes of the past that used to be a huge part of different cultures in the past, one of which was the samurai you talked about in your book, The Bushido Bitcoin. And I'm sure you've looked at other ones as well. I can't remember off the top of my head which ones you've studied, but how does this phenomenon of having these very high responsibility warrior classes in history change the way a society functions?
Yeah, that's a big question. there's a couple threads to pull out here. So number one is if you think of society almost as an organism, the warrior class is sort of like the white blood cells, right? They seek out foreign entities, and they protect the barriers, and they exterminate any potential disease or whatever, right? And that's the function of the warrior class. And I actually had an argument with bloody Jimmy Song about this, because he's like, "Oh, the warrior class is not relevant anymore." I'm like, it's never been more relevant, because like you cannot hope to, like, economics doesn't solve everything. Like, in fact, what underlies economics is force, and this is a big area that I've come to diverge with libertarians as well. Is like the most fundamental language in existence is force. There's no more fundamental language. Like, if you can go and explain, do everything you want, but at the end of the day, everything comes down to either the point of a gun or the end of a fist, right? So if that's the case, like, you cannot abolish the warrior class, because they act as the boundary protectors, the border control, which is extremely relevant, because you need to demarcate territory in some way, shape, or form, whether that is down to the biological level with the membrane around a cell, all the way up through to the societal civilizational level, which, as we know, we've started abolishing borders, and the West is getting overrun, and all this sort of crap's happening, right? So the warrior class has traditionally acted as that barrier, as that border zone, as that protective membrane for civilization. So that's been one thing. With great power, though, comes great responsibility. So the warrior classes that have been most functional, inspiring, and whose principles have embedded themselves in society have been the most mature warrior classes, the ones who really understood that with great power comes great responsibility.
Could you give us some examples real quick? I just threw out a samurai as an example, but what are some other examples people could kind of use as an idea to think about this?
The knights of Christendom, the knights of Europe were those. The I think it was the centurions or whatever were kind of like similar. Maybe it was the higher class of warriors with Rome. I mean, the Greeks, the hoplites. It's a very, also, I will say, it's a very European and Japanese thing. It was not very. I mean, you probably had it in elements of India, the richer parts. There's. I mean, actually, I should say that it's probably existed all over the place. In fact, it's even existed in smaller capacities in Africa, and also in the Latin American regions and stuff like that. But it seemed to be the most sophisticated by far in Europe and in Japan. That was like the most sophisticated incarnation of it. But yeah, the warrior classes have existed in all of these. Yeah, like as I'm thinking about it out loud, I retract what I said earlier. It is definitely all over the world, but it was the most sophisticated in Japan and Europe. So, with that being said, the warrior class also acted as an inspirational beacon for the classes below them, right? Like, they were the protectors, and people looked up to them, and how the protectors behaved had a big influence on how the rest of society behaved. Once again, this was huge with the samurai in Japan, where the lower classes, if the samurai were coming past in any way, the lower classes would stop and they would bow until the samurai passed through, particularly on the main roads and all this sort of stuff.
And it wasn't out of like being scared of them; it was respect, right?
It was respect, exactly. Mm-hmm. And this is something that the modern bugman just doesn't understand. It's like, oh, why should I respect this person? It's like each person had their role. Like, the samurai protected the peasants, the artisans, and everybody else so that they could live a life in peace. And the samurai got the respect for that protection. There was far fewer of the samurai, but they wielded much greater power than the collective that was dependent on them. So there was that inspiration to the lower classes, but then they were the almost like the class that the royalty and aristocracy depended on for their existence, right? Because the royalty were not going to go out and fight themselves. Some did, obviously, and there was much royalty, particularly in in Europe, I mean, even up to like if you consider the shogun in Japan, I guess they're not royalty, the daimyo and the shogun, but many of them were previously samurai, so that, they rose up through the ranks. Japan's structure was a little bit different, obviously, than what you had in Europe, but the 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 nobility, the aristocracy, really depended on the warriors to maintain power and control and all this sort of stuff. So they also had a respect. So in many ways, like the warrior class was like a beacon in these societal structures. They were respected by all other classes, and it's with the warrior class that the codes of virtue or the codes of being kind of like what's the word, like permeated or like spread into society. I don't have the right word in my head, but that's what happened, and to me that's very powerful, and it's something that is sorely lacking today. Like we no longer, I mean, we don't really have warrior class anymore. Now we have what's called like a soldier class, and a soldier and a warrior are very different. Like I can't remember who I was speaking to about this, but they made a fantastic distinction, which is like, a soldier is told just what to do. They're order takers and they're enforcers, whereas a warrior is fundamentally both there because they have to. It's a duty, but also there through like the impulse of courage, of the responsibility to do it. It's like by their volition. So there's a very different energy that comes with being a warrior than with being a run-of-the-mill soldier. And I think what's happened, particularly in the last 100 years in the age of fiat, very much so, in the age of the nation state, in the age of democracy, is that we've transformed the warrior into a mere soldier. Like it's almost like a fucking machine that just grinds people through. And I don't know if there was any way to avoid that. Like as the world became more economic and as the world became more market driven and commercial, I feel like that's where we had to go. That being said, I think there will be a rising up again of this kind of a class, and I think with the transformation of technology and how the future is going to look and all this sort of stuff, I think there will be a new kind of warrior class that emerges. I don't know exactly what it is, but there's something there. So anyway, before I go off any other tangents, I'll stop there.
Yeah, that's a really good contrast. I was going to bring that up, how today we just have like foot soldiers and police. Like I, I can't imagine anyone like bowing in respect to the police. Like, it's just an arm of the fiat government now. It's just a piece of this fiat machine that has no respect or code. The code
Mm-hmm.
is just passed down from the oligarchs, and there's no respect on either side, really. They're just like a tool that the higher ups use, and the people on the bottom just have to follow the rules or go to jail, get thrown in a cage if they don't pay their taxes or do whatever they decide.
Yeah,
And
100%.
completely different paradigm. And there's, I don't think it's any coincidence, there was no fiat money in samurai times. What was the time period again? I'm forgetting how long ago the samurai were around.
I mean, the samurai sort of emerged around 1000 AD, roughly. Maybe earlier, but like they really sort of came to prominence between the 1200s and the 1800s, and in the last like 400 years of that. So like the kind of like, or let's say 300 years, like 1500 to 1800. That was like the peak period of the samurai age.
And what led to that crumbling and falling down? Because Japan is very different today as we look at it. And you talk about in your book how Japan still definitely has that the underlying energy of this honor, you know. I
Mm-hmm,
really want to
mm-hmm.
go there someday. Have you been to Japan, by the way?
I went when I was younger once,
Okay.
but I did not spend too much time there. So I dream of living at least 6 to 12 months there over the coming years.
Yeah, I'd love to see it too, because I think it's just a really good example of where the history has successfully permeated through the generations, and there's still a bit of it there. It's not the same, but there's still a
Yeah,
piece of it. Um,
yeah. It was the last. It was the last feudal stronghold, and the what exists in feudalism is very much a hierarchy that is bound by loyalty and respect. So that energy still like exists in the DNA and the culture and the and the kind of and Europe had that, but Europe moved on from feudalism a couple hundred years before, so we have a lot less of that. And particularly, like, America never really had feudalism, so like it's sort of not in that DNA. It was in more older European DNA. But what led to the crumbling of Japan? It's I think many things. There, I mean, they were much smaller as a nation, obviously, than all of the other powers combined. In the 1800s, particularly, you had the Russians were going over there, the Americans, the British, the Portuguese, the Spanish. Like, everyone was there. The West, combined, and the West had managed to really, really, really accelerate, economically speaking, past Japan because fundamentally of like Europe was a much bigger landmass than what Japan is alone, but Europe also like just had that real rivalry and competition, for hundreds and hundreds of years. Like, Japan had that too, but amongst Japanese, whereas Europeans had it between Spanish and French and English and all this sort of stuff. So they managed to like get ahead in terms of the evolution of that capacity, and economics just became far more prevalent and important earlier on in Europe than it did in Japan, and the Europeans managed to amass a lot of wealth, and then particularly with the rise of America and new lands and everything that happened there, Europe and America started like really taking off at a pace faster than Japan, and then they went there and they subdued the Japanese because they had superior firepower. But there was enough respect because of how strong Japan was in terms of like their warrior culture that they didn't. It wasn't like what happened when Europe went to America, right? Where it was like a much more basic culture, like the Indians and the natives and everything like that. Japan was like a culture with cities and millions of people and all this sort of stuff. It was large and it was big, and in fact, in many ways, it was more advanced than Europe in particular areas. So when the Europeans went there, they kind of bought Japan off. They introduced Western fashion, Western style, Western government, Western weaponry, Western education. That was a big one. And slowly by slowly, the Western banking, like all this sort of stuff that didn't sort of exist before. And Japan went through like rapid modernization. And the Japanese are very, very, very capable people. Like, I would argue that they're more European than they are Asian. And that'll trigger a lot of people, but I think that is very true. Like, in fact, just even in the demeanor and the behavior, like the German language in its like harshness and its like precision is far more like Japanese in its harshness and its precision. You look at the different, like they're completely different people, but they both produced knights. They both produced feudalism. They both produced a similar kind of structure and order and dedication to perfection, all this sort of stuff. There's just like very, very fascinating similarities amongst them. So anyway, with all that being said, Europe was far ahead economically speaking and was able to essentially buy Japan off. Now, there was other reasons as well, like the Portuguese made it to Japan in the 1600s and they brought Christianity to Japan, which didn't, like, it fit in some ways, but in other ways it didn't fit. And there was like a big bifurcation amongst the daimyos that were running the different parts of Japan. Some were Christian, some were completely anti-Christian, and that created a lot of rivalry and opportunity for Europe to kind of like incept themselves. When Tokugawa Ieyasu, he was the guy who finally unified Japan after the Warring States period. He kind of expelled all the Europeans and got them the fuck out of there. and kind of like blocked Japan. And I think a lot of that kept the integrity of the Japanese culture and the Japanese people and their way of life and all that sort of stuff. It wasn't until the 1800s again that Europe slowly made its way back in the twilight of that final shogunate, when the basically economics started to become more and more important, and trade started to take off a little bit again, and there was like Macau is close by, Korea, and those trade routes and everything were opening up. Hong Kong had just been founded by the English, and like money was moving, and ultimately I would say that that's what happened in Japan. And I don't want to say it as like it's not all bad. It's also not all good. Like it was sort of like a mixture of things. But ultimately Japan kind of became this almost like a mix of what it was and what the West was at the time. And it's kind of like remained some blend of that 100 years on, 150 years on.
So those listening who haven't read your book or your articles or your work around this would be asking right about now, what the heck does Bitcoin have to do with any of this? So I'd love to bring up this part now, how looking at the money, and we talked a little bit how, banking infiltrated and that was part of the downfall. How does Bitcoin come into this story where you're writing the Bushido of Bitcoin and fusing this all together, and where the lessons start to come in that people can actually use today to make their decisions about the future?
Oh man, big question. So let me tell a little bit of a story about when I started writing Bushido, and around the time you read the first kind of draft. Was the first thinking I had around writing the Bushido of Bitcoin was to kind of do what you just said, like relate Bitcoin back to Bushido, these principles, and how Bitcoin might help bring that kind of a civilization about again. The book changed significantly since then, honestly. I went through ups and downs. Like the book started off as a bit of an orange pill, then it kind of evolved into a bit of a red pill, and then it went total black pill, and then it ended up mega white pill. Like this is sort of where the book finished now. So it's like an inspiring book. I remember going back to some of the earlier drafts, and I was like, damn, bro, like I must have been really pissed about the world, and like looking for a return to the glory days of the warrior past. But I think for me it comes down to what I said earlier about like Bitcoin being a socioeconomic framework for excellence, and that just comes down to the fact that Bitcoin is as close as possible as we can get to economic reality, and with that substrate, there's like a different playbook that's necessary to win on that substrate. So I guess this is probably the best way I can frame the relationship between Bitcoin, Bushido, and all this sort of stuff that I'm talking about is on a fiat standard, on a fiat democratic standard, I should say. The way to win is to get into central banking, to get into politics, to lie, to cheat, to steal, to be a parasite, to do all that sort of shit, right? That's how you get ahead. Like if someone was to write a playbook for how to get ahead in fucking 2020, that's what it would be. Like wear a mask, lie, cheat, steal, do whatever you got to do, right? If we fast forward 100 years, my argument is that on a Bitcoin standard, the playbook for winning will be very different. The behaviors that will be demanded, it's like be more responsible, be more excellent, be more courageous, respect justice, have love and compassion for people. Like I think those behaviors, those virtues will become ever more important than the playbook of the fiat world. So I kind of state in the book, it's like, look, this is a playbook for success on a Bitcoin standard. And if we want to build a new civilization, like civilization is downstream of culture, and culture is downstream of behavior, of virtue. Like virtue is like where it all starts. And I make a claim in the end of the book where I say, look, And I can't remember when you read it, whether I was talking about it as a moral code. And I kind of got rid of, like, I went and did Control F and I found where I was talking about morality. And I was like, delete, 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 delete. Because the book is not telling you what to believe, morally speaking. Like, if you want to know what to believe, go read the fucking Bible, go read the Quran, like, go find something to believe in. This is, like, to me, virtue transcends morality. Virtue is upstream of morality, because I can sit here and moralize at you all day about what's right and what God said and this and that. Um, but I can't lie about virtue, right? Like, if we recognize courage, for example, like, if someone, like, we recognize excellence, like, it's something that we see. Like, if I'm sitting here and I'm like fat, overweight, stupid, and all this sort of stuff, I can talk about my morals, but the virtue is inescapable. It's like it represents itself in my body and my being and how I present myself. So virtue is something that cross culturally, despite your beliefs, you could be a Muslim, you could be a Christian, you can be a Buddhist, whatever. We all recognize courage. So that virtue transcends. We all recognize responsibility. We all recognize excellence. We all recognize love. We all recognize duty. We all recognize these things. So for me, the book is about what are the great virtues? What are the 10 virtues that matter the most? And I picked 10 because I don't fucking know. Why did Satoshi pick 21? I picked 10. It was a good enough number. And like the old school Bushido was like 8 virtues. I picked 10 because I wanted to squeeze some more in there. And I remember I had 11 initially, but I ended up like settling on 10 because there was a little bit of overlap between a couple of them. And I don't write it from a place of Svetski knows. Like, these are the virtues these are Svetski's virtues of living. No, it's not. These are virtues that the great civilizations, the great cultures and the great civilizations have been built upon. So there is truth there. If the great Christian West, if the great Faustian West was built on a set of virtues inspired by the chivalric knights and everything that happened in the West, and that set of virtues was the exact same one that the Japanese were using thousands of miles away, with no fucking relationship between the two, and they both built the most sophisticated, functional, best civilizations in history, there's got to be some truth there. And when you seek, you find that these same sort of very similar codes existed among the Greeks, among the Romans, amongst all of these great cultures that had built civilization previously. So my whole argument is that if we want to do something of a similar degree, if we want to, or I shouldn't even say a similar degree, if we want to do something to the next level and take all of the technological prowess we have, all of the strength we have, all the knowledge we have now, like, we've got the fucking internet, we've got Bitcoin, we've got all this sort of cool shit that the Romans and the samurai and these guys never fucking had. If we can layer on their strength of virtue, their strength of behavior, their culture, we will have a civilization that goes to the fucking stars. If we don't, we'll just blow ourselves up. And that's kind of the stakes here. It's like literally to colonize the stars or to become stardust. Like, that's our fucking choice at this point, because we are technologically powerful enough for either. And I think it's extremely, extremely, extremely important to look at this topic. It's not about just having the money. It's about having the character to build civilization again.
And this is such a perfect opportunity to throw in one of my other favorites of yours. I thought we were going to run away from it, but this is perfect time. Fire, Bitcoin, and teleportation. One of your old articles you did.
Yeah.
And I love how you you definitely kept people thinking almost right out of the gate. They're thinking, "What? Come on!" Really, with it's in the same category as those. Really, could you give me the case for why Bitcoin is indeed in this class, and like why you picked those three in the title: fire, Bitcoin, teleportation? I think it's an interesting mix of things to plant into people's brains as they're thinking about the future and what it could be like on Sound Money.
Yeah. That's I mean, the title actually was a joke when Francis Pulio and I were driving through Miami, and we were explaining Bitcoin to someone, and he was like, "Oh, Bitcoin's the greatest thing that happened since, I don't know, fucking fire, and the next thing, who knows what it's going to be, fucking teleportation." And I kind of like took that and I was like, interesting. And I didn't come back to it like for 6 months when I sat down to actually write the article. And it was just like, it was like that splinter in your mind. Like, it was this meme sitting there and I was like, there's something here. So I took that and I turned it actually into an essay, and I just made the case for like, look, fire fundamentally transformed civilization, not just civilization, humanity. Like it made us different. It was a speciation event, and we became genetically, psychologically, everything different post fire. Now, some people might argue that's bullshit. Evolution is a scam, all this sort of stuff. Whatever. I still fundamentally believe fire had a big role to play in who we are, right? Whether God gave us fire, whatever the case was, it's remains to be. It doesn't remain to be seen. It'll be debated forever, I should say. The fact of the matter is, fire is definitely important, and we wield fire very differently than every other species does. Like, you don't see cats and dogs like setting up a fire and cooking their food. Like, we use it very differently. And fire in many different capacities. Like, I would put electricity in that. I'd put nuclear fusion, nuclear power, and everything. That is like, fire is that sort of energy. It's like a depiction of that. Bitcoin fundamentally as well, it's a 0 to 1 moment. We have never really had money. Like, if we really think of it, like, and we really try and understand what Bitcoin is, like, gold was not money. Like, fiat is not money. None of these things are actually money. Bitcoin is money 1.0, really. Like, everything else has been an MVP of money, and now we finally actually have a money, and the impact that it's going to have on civilization, on humanity, on us. Like, we talked about, like, the speciation event, like Homo Bitcoinicus and Homo Hystericus. Like, we're gonna bifurcate. We're gonna be different people, and a big part of that is the relationship to reality that the money we use gives us. And one money is completely fucking imaginary and untethered to reality. The other one is being Bitcoin, and that creates a completely different feedback loop for the way we're going to continue to evolve. And that leads us to a completely different outcome, a completely different place at the end of the day. And for me, that speciation event is kind of similar to the way we harness energy. Like, we'll do the same thing. And I think it was in that article that I had, like, the great filter thing, right? Where I talk about, like, all the stages,
I wish
right?
I had the time to go and read them all through. I didn't get.
Yeah,
I can't remember.
I'm pretty sure I had it in there. So I kind of like make this case for, like, the great filter for people who don't know what that means. It's like, there's the Fermi paradox, which is based on how much stars and how much is out there in the galaxy, we should be seeing life everywhere. Why do we not? Well, a guy, I think it was a physicist or something like that, called Robin Hanson, I think that was the name. He came up with this idea of the great filter, which is there's a bunch of things that need to happen that are all dependent on each other in order for a species to achieve space faring capacity. And in there is like, okay, there needs to be some sort of the emergence of RNA, and then RNA needs to become DNA. There needs to be then the movement towards like eukaryotes and prokaryotes and the ability to like split up, and then sex needs to form, and then from there like simple organisms need to evolve, and then larger organisms need to evolve, and all this sort of stuff. But there's a bunch of steps that he misses. He goes from like humans to going to space. And I was like, whoa. Like, there's 5 steps here that need to happen. Like, these humans need to develop the capacity to build, or this life form needs to develop the capacity to build tools. They need to develop economics and be able to have like division of labor and be able to scale up civilization. Then they need to discover a form of money that is I think I might be skipping a few steps here or something, but like, they need to discover a form of money that enables them to maximize the use of energy in order to reach escape velocity. Like, they need to be able to get off the planet if they want to become spacefaring. And at the moment, the civilization we live in at the moment, we waste 99% of our energy through fiat. We waste it on stupidity, on government, on politics, on money printing. Like, the money doesn't reflect anything. We burn through fucking everything. Like, if the environmentalists understood how much money goes to waste, how much resources, real wealth goes to waste as a result of the fiat money printer, as a result of the misallocation of resources as a result of malinvestment, as a result of just straight up fucking wastage, it would melt their brains. So the argument I make is that unless a civilization moves on to a Bitcoin standard in time for them to get control of the technology, they will likely blow themselves up. So therefore, Bitcoin is like a prerequisite to get through the great filter, and that's when we become a spacefaring species and all this sort of stuff. And from that point, like the next real big, breakthrough is probably going to be teleportation. It's like maybe 1,000 years from now, like when we've been on a Bitcoin standard for 1,000 years and we're like colonized the solar system or whatever. At that point, maybe someone figures out fucking teleportation, and at that point, that's the next big thing, because now with teleportation, you compress time. Time is the ultimate limiting factor for economics, right? Like you can have all the resources you want in the world, but you still have to prioritize them. Maybe teleportation does something with time, and then it changes the relationship to money or the necessity for it or something. But like that's so fucking far fetched and so down the road, like it doesn't matter. Right now the big speciation event is Bitcoin, and like that's why I kind of put it in that category. It's kind of like half tongue in cheek, half joke, half real, but there's a case to be made there.
There's always an element of truth to these things, and I'm with you. I think that it's definitely on that scale. And one of the things you mentioned in there that I think a lot of folks out there could really benefit from highlighting is just the importance of economics and how a species evolves and grows and becomes more prosperous. We've all been indoctrinated so hard to believe that money is the root of all evil, like rich people are bad, greedy corporations, it's all these negative things about the idea of money, suspiciously coming straight from the government propaganda on a TV. It's usually feeding us down, just getting people to think that like they're associating negativity with money and economics. And I don't think people really have a good understanding of how this has helped our species progress. So could you give us a bit of a breakdown on why, and we talked about Austrian economics, different forms of economics, that's maybe a little outside the scope, we could go there if we want to, but why this idea of just having a form of money that people can trade in an economic system to facilitate it is so powerful for our species?
Yeah, so funny. On my Instagram, I did a post today. It says, "The love of money is to know and love the fact that money is the creation of the best power within you, a passkey to trade your effort for the effort of the best among men." And that's from Ayn Rand. And like another one of her quotes is, "Money is not evil, but its opposite, a token of honor." And I think that's it's so like misunderstood. Like it's very easy for people, and they do this all the time. It's like, oh, money's evil and all this sort of stuff. And what they do is they establish a really like poor relationship with it. Like money is effectively like energy. That's it. Like it flows, and money wants to flow. Like, and if you can help it flow, by creating, by producing, by moving it along, by networking and all this sort of stuff, what ends up happening is more money comes to you. You develop wealth. Like wealth is a function of the flow of energy, of the flow of money. And I'm not trying to sound like a fucking hippie here. Like I mean it in the sense that, the people who understand how to produce wealth and how to be capital allocators and how to direct that monetary energy in a particular way, they produce more of it because it builds, it compounds. Poverty is a function of having a poor relationship to this energy and stultifying that movement, right? Like poor people aren't fucking just poor because someone said so. Like poor people create poverty. Like that's the true definition of a poor person, is someone who creates the poverty because they do not have a relationship with the energy of money. They don't create more with it. They don't do more with it. They don't let it flow. They don't produce something out of it. And I just think like, it's not, I know you can't have any form of civilization without the ability to transact, without the ability to store, without the ability to measure, without the ability to interact with others, without the ability to divide labor, without the ability for, the effort and energy amongst people to be transferred and moved around. Money is the glue that ties that all together. It's the fabric of civilization. And when you start to understand it like that, you start to realize how like just how fucking necessary this thing is. And then on a personal note, you start to realize that there's so much fucking money out there that you can make whatever you want. You can produce, you can create, you can do stuff. It's not like, oh, the government, God is against me, whatever, like I'm poor, I'm this and that. No, it's like, no, fuck that. Like, change your relationship to money and learn how to create, how to increase the flow and how to create value. And you'll find that money will find its way to you.
And I should add, that isn't to say there aren't like massively unfair factors out there that are making it more difficult for the lower classes right now. As we talked about fiat, they are given a really bad hand. A lot of time people are born into these terrible situations in certain locations where fiat has just ravaged their community or their family, and to different varying degrees. And that's where Bitcoin comes in, which is why I always say to when I get in these arguments with these people who bring this up, and I think that I'd be curious of your thoughts on this. Something I hear people say a lot is, well, poor people can't afford to buy Bitcoin. So how is it going to help them? It's just going to make it worse for them. And I know that you have some interesting ideas on this, just how, Bitcoin rises up the people who have it inside of them to become great. It isn't necessarily just going to like save all the poor people, and this is your article, Bitcoiners are not utopians, I believe it was called. So maybe you could give a little bit of meat on that bone. I think that's an interesting topic that might maybe trigger some people, but it could be worth talking about.
Let's trigger some people. Let me say a first triggering statement here, okay? Bitcoin is not for poor people. So I'm sorry, poor people, fuck you. Now let's qualify this. What do I mean by poor people? So I grew up in a relatively poor family. I grew up to immigrant parents in Australia. They escaped communism. They came on a fucking boat. They couldn't afford the plane. And they were working
Where was
class.
this from?
From Macedonia, and they came to Australia. So Macedonia was like Yugoslavia or some shit at the time. So they came and they were working class people, and they worked their asses off, 2-3 jobs each. Me and my brother grew up basically in the fucking van because they couldn't afford a babysitter or anything like that. So they both worked at this factory picking or sorting fruit or some shit like that. So they would, wake us up in the middle of the night, 2:00 in the morning, and drive to hour and a half to where the factory was. And then my dad, I think, would start at 2:00 in the morning or 2:30. Whatever time he woke us up was an hour and a half before that. And then my mum wouldn't finish work until like 3 or 4 hours after him. So they'd work these night shifts, and then she'd come and take us home, and we'd kind of like sleep in the car all that time. So believe me, I understand what material poverty looks like. Maybe not to the degree of someone living in Africa in the dust, right? Like, but we all sort of like had a lottery in terms of the way where we were born and who we were born to and all that sort of stuff. So that's material poverty. But there's a difference between a poor person and a wealthy person in the sense that a wealthy person just has something about them that knows how to make energy or wealth flow. They can create something out of nothing. They can produce something. I know many people who are materially wealthy, but they're fucking poor people, because they only know how to waste. They only know how to be a net negative. They only know how to stultify. They only need to know how to be a fucking tight ass, right? Like my dad, for example, he'll always probably be a poor person. Even though he was a boomer and he had property and all this sort of stuff, like the guy lives like a fucking peasant. And I love my dad and all that sort of stuff, but he acts like a poor person, and he'll never, ever, ever, ever get out of that mindset. I know people who started with nothing and actually built up something. I try and like fashion myself in that capacity because I started with nothing and I had to build every single bit of wealth that I have today. And I didn't fucking stop, dude. I have lost everything multiple fucking times, from my audacity, from my stupidity, from the mistakes I've made and everything like that. But I've got up again, and I've gone and jumped back in the ring, and I've gone to create wealth. I've added value. I've hustled. I've created. I've produced. I've done something, right? So poverty and wealth are acts. They're ways of being. And Bitcoin will not help poor people. Bitcoin will only help wealthy people. And people who maybe started out materially poor, who have the capacity, who have the dignity and the self-respect to say, I'm not going to trade my time, my effort, the value I create, my labor, and none of that stuff. I'm not going to trade it for some fucking toilet paper that, with someone's face printed on it. I'm not going to trade it for some token that a central bank issued me. I'm going to trade it for something useful, something meaningful, something that I can control. those people are going to rise up and come out of the material poverty that they have, and that's fucking fair. It's not equal. It is absolutely fair, and that's why I just don't care about like all the whole we got to help everyone. No, we fucking don't. We need to help the best. The people who want to rise up, who want to pull themselves up, they're the ones that Bitcoin's going to help the most. Everybody else, fuck them. Like, and we don't have to worry about them.
Yeah, and I mean, throughout history, it was the greats, the excellent ones that built the best societies ever. It was
Definitely.
never like every single person in that society was doing great things. There's always that curve, like you said, the Pareto curve or whatever it's called.
Yeah, Pareto distribution. Yeah, the 80-20.
Yeah.
Yep.
So as long as we create a fair system where anyone can climb their way up and have a transparent set of rules where people can plan for the future, that's a huge one. Because right now under fiat, it's like this is a analogy a lot of Bitcoiners use, is the measuring stick is like a wet noodle. It's moving around all over the place. You can't build a house if the definition of a foot and an inch are constantly changing, which is the type of money we have right now. And that is like the ultimate measuring stick. So like, how big of a change is that when we finally have Bitcoin, this stable measuring device for the amount of value people create? Because I think that's really the simplest way to put it, is that money is amazing because it actually becomes this way where people can create anything that they are good at, which is one of the great things about humans. We have very different brains. We all have different specializations. We can focus on our specialty and have a way to measure that, how much value we provide for other people. So how does that really change the paradigm that we're in when we have a stable measuring stick?
That ties back to the whole fire Bitcoin teleportation. I think I originally made that analogy there, maybe earlier, I don't know, but it was about the blind men building a house with an elastic tape measure versus sighted people building it with actual tools and a fixed rule, right? That's the difference. So it's like right now we're a bunch of blind people because we can't see into the future, we can't predict properly, and we're trying to build a house blind with an elastic tape measure. So it's like when you measure the fucking thing, like it's moving. It's like so imagine the kind of, like, it's a miracle that civilization is like holding together because we're literally blind people fucking using elastic tape measures. Somehow the shit's coming together and it's holding on, and that is testament to how good the people who came before us were with the thing that they've built, right? We're somehow kind of hanging on. And it's also a testament to like the ingenuity of humanity, because even with all of the disadvantages, there is still a small productive elite, like people who actually produce so much value outsized compared to others. Like Elon Musk is one of these examples. Like still, it kind of counterbalances all of the stupidity. Like one sighted person can manage, a million, can counterbalance a million blind fucking people, right? So like that's like, the difference is going to be a bunch of people being sighted using an actual measuring stick or a rule that functions, a tape measure that is fixed. Like the kind of structure, it's night and day. Like it's not even in the same galaxy. And that to me is like why, another reason why Bitcoin is like this speciation event. It's fundamental for us to get to that stage.
I love it. I have a couple last things here I'd like to do before we start wrapping things up here, Aleks. The first one is going through a handful of words that, some of which we've talked about today, some of which we haven't. These are things that you've really defined differently than I think for most people. And I'd love to hear just your brief, quick thoughts on each one, how you would describe it in a nutshell. I've got 9 of them. You ready?
All right, let's go.
First one's fiat.
Imaginary, like what am I trying to say here? Like fantasy. That's
okay. Communism.
Ugly.
Capitalism.
Organic.
Democracy.
Yeah, stupidity, ugly, fantasy, like all that sort of stuff.
Meritocracy.
Also like natural and deserved.
Anarchy.
Infantile.
Inequality.
Natural.
Taxes.
Um, hmm. Mostly bad.
Mostly. Interesting. Bitcoin. Last one.
Um, Framework for excellence. There we go.
Awesome. Awesome. Let's quickly jump into Satlantis here. That's the last thing I wanted to really talk to you about, because that is
Mhm.
another one of the projects you've been working on. This is a little bit of a hard cut from what we've been talking on before, but this is one of these solutions that's coming out that I am excited to chat with you about, because I am a traveler myself. Currently, I'm nomading all over the place, and this sounds like just the sort of thing that these sorts of people can really resonate with. This sounds like a cool Nostr client, right? It's a Nostr client. Could you maybe break down what is Satlantis from a one-on-one level so we can check that out?
Yeah, let's do it. Do you know what I'm going to do? I am going to share the screen just
Excellent.
because why not? And I think it'll be a lot of fun. So, yes, to answer your question, Satlantis is a new kind of Nostr client. It's hard to describe because it's sort of like when Facebook first came out, people didn't know what to compare it to. It's like this is something that I don't know what to compare it to. It's almost like a mix of Nomad List, of Meetup.com, of Google Places, of Instagram. Like there's a bunch of things. So there's two parts to the app. There is a desktop experience and there's a mobile experience, and they're both related, but they're fundamentally different to each other. So I'm going to start quickly with actually, you know what? I'm going to start with the mobile for everyone so they can have a look. The mobile experience is a social experience. And unlike other Nostr apps, ours is image and video only. So it actually looks and feels much more like Instagram than it does like Twitter, right? It's very visual. The text is all caption based, and if you post on another Nostr client, if you've got an image, it'll appear here. If it's text only that you've posted, it will not appear on Satlantis. So we're trying something new with this. You can obviously open up the caption, you can write a little bit extra, whatever you want to do, all that sort of stuff. And the comments and replies, once again, look much more like Instagram than they do a Twitter thread. Everything is more designed, once again, as I said, for imagery, and everything is designed so you can tag a location. So this will make a lot more sense when I show you the city pages in a minute. So that's kind of like the feed. Beyond that, you'll notice that our user accounts are very much also, once again, like Instagram. So we have like a persistent profile. But we've also got some interesting other things. So it's like the info tab, that's like information about you. It's kind of like a link tree. Collections is a very interesting idea. It's kind of like public bookmarks where, like, imagine if you as a nomad, you're going to all these cool places. You could have a collection of all the cities you've been to. You could have a collection of all of the cool cafes you've been to, either within each city or outside of each city. So I know, for example, I always get asked when people come to visit me in Brazil, they're like, "Oh, where's the best cafes? Where's the best beaches? Where's the best gyms? Where's the best
Best
this? Where's the best
steak.
that?"
Give me the best
Dude, the
steak.
steak, all
That's
that
all I
sort of stuff.
need.
Exactly. Like, if I could have that as a collection, right? You could have all the best steak places that you've seen all around the world as a collection that you can just then tell people, hey, just check out my collections, type in steak, and you can find it. So it's like a really cool, almost like a blend of Pinterest and Instagram bookmarks, right? So
Oh, cool.
you've got that. Merchants is one of my favorite features. It's like they're very much like an Instagram page where merchants, for the first time ever, they can build an audience, but they also have an info tab, which is like Google. So now they have like Instagram and Google in one, where they've got their information and people can click on the map and then go find them. And they also have reviews. And the coolest thing about the reviews is that they are so we actually pull in reviews from like Google and stuff like that. We'll also pull in reviews from elsewhere, but you can do reviews on Satlantis. And the powerful thing about the reviews on Satlantis is that not only is everything like a Nostr post, right? So you do a review, it'll come up on Nostr as a normal kind one event. But if I come to Mexico and I'm following you and I go to a place that you've been, I will see your review before I see anybody else's. Like your social graph influences what you see. So now we are solving basically the problem of fake reviews and the problem of irrelevant reviews.
The trust issue.
Yes,
Because no
super,
one
super
knows these
powerful.
days if these are just like pumped out by the company itself to just pump themselves up.
Totally. So you've got that problem, and then you've even got a bigger problem, which is if a vegan goes and gives a steak restaurant 0 out of 5, like, what the fuck does that have to do with you, right? Like, so that like affects the score, and it's irrelevant to you. So like this kind of stuff hasn't been addressed because the social graph hasn't been a part of any of these things, and that's what we're trying to change here. The other part of the app is like, location lists, so you can find merchants and all this sort of stuff, but that's irrelevant now to discuss. So you've got this social app. What the social app does is it feeds into the desktop app, and the desktop app is a little bit more like kind of TripAdvisor Nomad List, where you've got all the cities. The cities are rank ordered by, you can rank order them by multiple things actually, like cost of living, or the rating, and the rating is a function of what people there think about different elements of the city, plus what the community rates and all this sort of stuff. And there's also trending scoring and all this other stuff. But if you click into a city, so if I clicked in Funchal here, I go to basically what our central component is what we call the city page. Now, what's really cool about the city page is it's also influenced by your social graph. So unlike like if you and I go to Funchal on TripAdvisor, you, me, and everybody else in the world is going to see the exact same page on TripAdvisor with the exact same merchants, with the exact same ratings, with the exact same everything. On Satlantis, we'll see completely different things. Like if you're a carnivore, you're interested in that sort of stuff, you'll see restaurants that are more meat oriented. You'll see people that are interested in carnivore. You'll see chats and communities or events like, the local carnivore meetup, Bitcoin barbecue, whatever, right? If I'm more interested in being a fucking vegan, I'll see more vegan stuff. So basically the city pages become dynamic based on who you follow, what your interests are, all that sort of stuff. So you can come in here and you can discover stuff. You can discover communities that match you. You can discover the events that are happening. You can go and, RSVP for them. You can see what apps are useful. And this feed here basically listens to the entire Nostr network, and anything that is relevant or anything that is tagged to the city or anything that is geolocated to the city will come in here, so you can find things spontaneously. You might be looking for a particular chat to join or an event or something like that, but you might see a farmer's market pop up. You're like, oh, that's cool. Click on the farmer's market. You go over there. You follow the farmer's market. You can zap them. You can contact them. You can notify them. You can find out where they are. All this sort of stuff. So it kind of like blends all of this stuff together. The people here like basically obsoletes apps like Orange Pill app because they're just irrelevant in this case. Like you can go to the city, you can find out who the people are, and you can see it's not creepy. You can follow them, you can establish a relationship with them, you can contact them, say that I'm coming in town or whatever, right? This is the scoring thing that we've got here. So we've got like the scores broken up into a bunch of different panels and all this sort of stuff, but irrelevant to discuss now. What else can I show you here? Obviously,
real quick, I want to just tell people who are listening, you got to pull this up on video. It looks beautiful.
Thank you, sir.
The aesthetic of it, the colors, the way it all comes together, it looks awesome.
Yeah, it's very nice. It's very nice. I can't wait to show this to people. So, obviously, desktop, takes some of what the mobile is and like applies it to desktop. We have. Oh, actually, this is really cool. We have the coolest merchant map on the planet. So what we've done, let's just keep this between us. Actually, no, you can tell everyone. Fuck it. We have pulled all of the best merchants from Seed Oil Scout, from BTC Maps, from Local Fats, from farmers market databases, from rawmilk.com, from like all of the places that matter, and they are all in our map. So this is going to be the ultimate map for sovereign individuals. Like every city or as many cities as we can is going to have a full structured list of this. And the best part about it is instead of paying $50 for Seed Oil Scout, you just use this for free. And in time will allow people to also add other venues. And then these venues, as I showed you earlier, they can actually claim their profile. We've got this whole claim flow that leverages their existing Google account. And once they claim, they can then build an audience, as I showed you earlier, because now they can actually get followers and all this sort of stuff. And all of it is on Nostr. And the best part is it's all abstracted. No, there's not a fucking word mentioned about Nostr. When they sign up, it's email and password. If they want to extract their NSEC, they can. But if they don't want to, which most people won't, they don't have to. So it's like, it's all there. It's all done. You have merchants, you have ambassadors, you have locals, you have events, you have everything all in one. So it's kind of like we're finding it hard to kind of distill what it is. So we're just kind of calling it the social network for sovereign individuals. That's kind of like the working sort of title at the moment. But that's what it is. I'm super excited about it. It's kind of like the Nostr super app. Like it'll interact with many different Nostr apps because there's things like Flockster that do just events, for example. There's things obviously like Primal and Damus that do just a feed. We're gonna have like multiple elements and a different desktop and mobile experience. So it's gonna be wicked. And yeah, I hope it'll become the place that people who want to be sovereign individuals come to, not only like connect and find people, but also to build an audience, to produce content, to do all that sort of stuff. Because this is like in 10 years from now, honestly, I don't think people are gonna, when they go to a new city, they're not gonna go to Google and find out on Google, or like fucking go to TripAdvisor. Like they're going to come to a dynamic page like this, and the page is going to evolve, or it's going to change, or it's going to adjust based on who they are, what they're interested in.
I can attest. It's a real pain when I move around to find like good places that I feel like I can trust is good based on other people's reviews, because it doesn't have
Totally.
that social graph factor. And
Totally.
Nostr integrating this is a totally new idea that I haven't heard yet. That is super super cool, and I'm really looking forward to playing with that. That's right up my alley, man. I've been flying all around Mexico. Could I go in there and like put in the information reviews from places I've already been, or do you have to like be there to verify it?
You would need to establish the city. So ideally, we'd want the city there, and like you could, for example, apply to be an ambassador, and then like we obviously screen ambassadors because we don't want just anyone just putting bullshit up there. But obviously you're sweet, so like you could apply to be an ambassador. You could found the cities. You could go in there and help establish the scoring matrix to sort of found the city. Then you can add merchants, so you can let us know which merchants you think should be on there. We basically pull all the data from the Google API. We bring them into our map. Then we make every single location an actual Nostr event. So in the future, if other apps ever build, they can leverage off that as well. We put everything on OpenStreetMaps as well. So like basically we're kind of like both open source and closed source in the sense that we're a product, but we're putting all the data on open source. We're making all the data open source compatible. So people who want to use OpenStreetMaps or want to use Nostr and everything later, they can also do it as well. And yeah, man, it's such a big project, and it's like honestly, it's been a grind. Like basically, it's been a year since sort of the idea came about, roughly, and it's been about 8 or 9 months working on it. And I thought we'd be launched a long time ago, but it's just been a grind and a grind and a grind because we're basically 4 or 5 apps in one. So it's certainly like it's
Yeah,
the first not the super app.
it's pulling every single thing together. Like this is a definition of a super app vision here.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
super cool. And I can tell why you're really shifting your schedule and your priorities to make this a major piece. This and like a little bit of writing probably
Yeah,
is
yeah,
sort
yeah.
of big
I
too.
think I found my ikigai, man. Honestly, like what the world needs, what I'm good at, what I'm passionate about, and what can make money. I think somewhere in there, like this is so like, dude. I mean, because you're a nomad now. Like I was a nomad for 5 years. I've been to 40 countries. Like I've done all that. I know. I went through all the pain. This is the product I wish I fucking had, and that's who I'm building it for. And the fact that we can do it in such a way with like making like I want to make Nostr and Bitcoin a part of the DNA, but not overt. Like none of this like, oh, this is a Bitcoin app or anything. It's like, no, no, no. All that shit is hidden. Like and I think this is really, really important for the next stage of Bitcoin companies. I was speaking to someone the other day about like the initial era of Bitcoin companies were very overtly Bitcoin companies, like exchanges, wallets, and miners. Like that was the first era. The next era of products is going to be implicitly Bitcoin like companies that have it in their DNA, but it's not like front and center. It's not on the front of the store like we accept Bitcoin. It's like it's part of it, and I think that's far more powerful, and that's going to be how we move to the next stage of adoption.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It's going to just become more just part of the social glue. And I know a lot of people call Nostr the social glue, and Bitcoin is like the financial side of that. It's just super awesome, and we're I'm just so excited to look back on these new things coming out in 5-10 years, because this is like the very beginning, very, very beginning. And it's really exciting time to be in it and to be following these sorts of projects. So where can people follow you, all of the projects you're working on? I know we went through so many things today.
I
It was
know,
a
right?
challenge to keep it all together, but we had to touch all of it because there's so many cool things to talk about.
Yeah.
I'm going to put a ton of links in the show notes for people to check out for all of those different articles we talked about and the books that you're writing, as well as Satlantis. But is there any other places that people should go to be able to find your work and your projects?
Yeah, I mean, probably the easiest, honestly, is my link tree, and it's just got all of like it links back to my Twitter, to my Nostr, to everything. But like, I mean, if Nostr is more handy, just search Svetski, and I'll come up there. And like, there's obviously, one of the problem with Nostr is like, there's bots and scammers and all that sort of stuff. So look for the one with roughly 25,000 followers, I think it is. So you'll know it's me. On Twitter as well, and Instagram and Substack, Svetski Writes, WRITES would be that. So, or once again, just fucking chuck it in Google, whatever, you'll find all of the links. But yeah, I think the link tree is the easiest and the best. If they're interested in the book, bushidoofbitcoin.com. And if they're interested in trying out Satlantis, depending on when this comes out, I mean, you can actually go to Satlantis now. Like we have the beta is live, so you can go in. You can, if you're already an Nostr user, you can have your NSEC sitting in an extension like Albi or keys.band or something like that, and you can one-click log in, and you can go and start following cities, posting some content, all that sort of stuff. The mobile app will be ready in about 2 weeks. So yeah, all guns blazing.
Amazing. Yeah, I'll be checking that out for sure. I can't wait to play with it. It's going to be exciting because this is a brand new use case out there for people like myself, and I know a lot of people listening. They're maybe thinking about doing more traveling and seeing more places and becoming more sovereign. Locationally sovereignty is a big theme right now, so looking forward to it. Man, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today, sir. Thank you so much for coming by, spending the time to discuss all of this with me. There's so much there for people to dig into, and I really appreciate you for doing this.
Likewise, man. I appreciate you. I appreciate all the support. I appreciate, as I said, the help you give me along the way. And yeah, looking forward to connecting in person, hopefully at one of these conferences or one of these events or whatever, and look forward to having another conversation a year from now and see where we're at that point, man.
We'll use Satlantis to facilitate, to figure out where we're both going to be. Awesome, man. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye, brother. Thank you.